You know, parkour is pretty cool. I wish I could do that in a video game. And not like free running in Prince of Persia or Assassin's Creed from a third person perspective, but a fully immersive parkour experience in first person. Someone should make that. And then they did. Mirror's Edge was developed by DICE, the company most well known for the Battlefield series, and published by EA. It was released in 2008 to generally positive reviews and nowadays has a very avid fan base surrounding it. I originally bought this game on Steam around the start of the pandemic with the intention of playing it, but it just didn't jive with me. I thought it controlled terribly, it was awkwardly optimized on PC, and the first 3 missions just didn't hook me. Now 2 years and several months later, I downloaded the game on Xbox to give it another try, and I admit I was much too harsh on the game initially. As I'll talk about later, I have a mostly positive opinion on this game with many small issues that individually don't matter much but can accumulate into a frustrating gameplay experience. And as per usual, this is your spoiler warning for the entire game, so let's tuck right into it. Don't hate me for that, please. The art style of Mirror's Edge was chosen to service the gameplay, focusing on simplicity over visual spectacle. However, this doesn't mean that the game doesn't look good. You're frequently on the rooftops of skyscrapers with some nice views of the unnamed city where the game takes place, but it's clear that ultra-realistic graphics were not a high priority. This gameplay focus is most evident in the runner's vision ability, where the path of progression through a level is highlighted with an object in red. The large contrast in the game's visuals ensures that this red object always stands out in the scenery and is never difficult to spot. Daytime levels are typically very bright, so the red is like a magnet for your eyes. And even in nighttime levels where things are less visible, the developers have ensured that these objects are impossible to miss. However, speaking more about the daytime levels, something I cannot ignore is how goddamn bright this game is. Levels that take place during the daytime or early morning always got an immediate sigh from me because I had to deal with this overexposed mess on my screen. Like seriously, what is this? I get what they were going for with making the sun exist and casting shadows like a normal game, but you genuinely cannot tell what the hell you're looking at sometimes because it's so goddamn bright. It was so annoying by the end of the game that I genuinely got excited whenever the mission took place at night. At least then I'd know where a ledge ends and a roof begins. Another aspect of the visuals are the cutscenes and in-game sequences. Some of the animations within these segments aged more like milk than fine wine. From the first tutorial where you're running through basic training procedures with your friend Celeste, you are immediately reminded that this game came out 14 years ago. This hardly changes my thoughts on the game, but it's still funny to point out. In contrast, I think the animated cutscenes between missions still look great to this day. I can't quite describe it, but they feel very at home in this game, and fit well with how the narrative is presented. The animation itself is clean, and the game's voice acting overall was pretty good. I enjoyed watching these while getting mentally prepared for the next mission of the game. And even though the gameplay visuals may not have wowed me, I gotta say that I was a big fan of the game's soundtrack. Casually parkouring through buildings and across rooftops is always accompanied by more ambient music to sit in the background, while police chases are amplified with more intense and stress-inducing music. Levels will often transition between these two states of play, and the music is designed to adapt organically to the situation, smoothly flowing from one track to another without any abrupt pauses to cause a lapse in the gameplay experience. It has a techno-futuristic vibe that sounds very atmospheric and passive while free-running, then loud and energetic while in combat. It's really good stuff. Mirror's Edge takes place in a futuristic city where all activity is heavily monitored by the ruling government, a setting that would make a high school English teacher lose their minds. You play as Faith, employed as a runner responsible for transporting information between individuals who wish to not have their personal lives surveyed by law enforcement. Faith is most definitely anti-government, though as you come to learn in this story, some of her fellow runners don't see the world quite as black and white. The main setup of the story is the assassination of a political figure who's campaigning to end the current era of oppression and totalitarianism in the city. You follow Faith through a journey motivated by ensuring her sister's safety and uncovering the truth. There's also involvement from a security company with the police to detain runners and prevent them from illegally distributing information under the codename Project Icarus. The previously assassinated political figure, Robert Pope, was found to be catching on to Project Icarus, which is likely what led him to being targeted. One of the key members in Project Icarus was the assassin responsible for causing these deaths, revealed to be one of Faith's close runner friends acting under self-interest. At the end of the game, you infiltrate the tallest building in the city where your sister is being held hostage by another former runner who was met earlier in the game. You eventually throw him out of a helicopter and escape safely with your sister as the game finishes with the fate of the two sisters left unknown. Overall, this is a pretty standard story for a game like this. though I still enjoyed it and appreciated having the context for exploring this vast city. The voice acting was well done and the cutscenes presented the story in an engaging way. I also liked how personal this story felt. Even though Faith and Kate have opposing ideologies, with one being a runner and the other being a police officer, they still care greatly about each other and would be willing to overthrow the entire government to protect each other. But now let's talk about the real meat and potatoes of this game. Faith has a versatile moveset for navigating the city of a high school English teacher's dream. You have running, jumping, wall running, pole climbing, wall kicking, pole swinging, sliding, rolling, jump tucking, object vaulting, and a variety of combat options to discuss later. All of these moves, when used right, serve the single goal of keeping you moving. This game is all about momentum and maintaining your speed to be the most effective at parkouring. More momentum equates to larger jump distances and quicker movement altogether. Experienced players can keep this going for entire levels, which requires a lot of practice, but becomes immensely satisfying when you reach that point. I haven't quite yet hit that skill level, but I've had a few brief moments of becoming Luigi from the best Nintendo documentary ever.
You know, he could jump higher. He could jump farther. He was everywhere. And he just slid off the map.
And it's not just knowing when and where to use moves. Learning how to control Faith is a whole other hurdle to vault over. The controls are something that you have to get used to through playing the game. Jumping is on the left bumper of the controller, with the left trigger used for sliding or break falling, and the right trigger for melee attacks. I found it initially very unintuitive, where I once said, quote, "What the f*** is this?" unquote. Nowadays I don't mind them and they work well enough for this game. They're most certainly responsive, which is good considering the type of game Mirror's Edge is. But once you get used to the controls, then it's all about learning the levels and how to best utilize Faith's moveset. The game starts you out with every single move you'll need to complete it, therefore the evolution of gameplay is seen within the environments you explore. While a majority of the game takes place among the rooftops of buildings and skyscrapers, Faith is no stranger to the indoors. One of the most memorable sections of the game finds Faith atop a moving train dodging oncoming signs, which is more about reaction time than a perfect execution of moves. Another section has you chasing your runner friend Celeste through a large cargo ship, which requires you to move very fast to maintain a reasonable distance from her. For something focused entirely on traversal, one of the last missions features a lengthy section of climbing scaffolding within a building under construction. You begin on the ground floor and slowly progress all the way up to the roof, to the point where you start to experience a bit of vertigo whenever you look down. Not only do the environments change, but so do the combinations of moves that you perform to complete these sections. One of the most common strings of moves you'll perform is a vertical wall run upwards, turning your head around and kicking off the wall to grab something behind you. It's very satisfying to perform, and there's no shortage of it during the game. The previously mentioned scaffolding section asks you to run along a wall and follow it up with a turnaround wall kick several times, or at least that's how I tackled it. Because yes, while all of this is cool, it gets even better on repeat playthroughs when you're playing these levels for a second time and notice alternate pathways through a level. While not every level is filled with secondary routes, they exist for keen players who express a greater degree of skill than a newcomer. That scaffolding section that I've already referenced a few times has many different ways of traversing it, and it's entirely possible that the path I took is very different from another person's, which is pretty awesome. However, there's more to the game outside of the parkour, and that's the combat against human enemies. Faith has a few moves for taking down police officers, or blues as the characters in the game call them. You have your punches, kicks, jump kicks, slide kicks, weapon disarms, and slow motion to dodge incoming fire. And yes, you heard that right, you get shot at in this game. But thank God you know karate to show them who's boss. The threats of enemies escalate quite drastically throughout the game as well. You start with regular guards with pistols, then eventually guards with more armor that can wield automatic rifles. Then there's some officers in juggernaut suits with an LMG, as well as long distance engagements with snipers. One of the later missions even have a mechanic similar to other platformers, where you're unable to retrace your steps due to enemies following closely behind you, promoting more urgency to move faster. The most effective way to take care of enemies in general is to use guns, which can be picked up after disarming an enemy. That being said, the window for successfully disarming is so small, it's borderline impossible without the use of slow motion, which I unfortunately forgot was a feature for a majority of the game and never even used it. However, this is okay, because for my playthrough I chose to go for an achievement that prevents you from shooting any enemies with guns, so I was never disarming in the first place. I got pretty good at taking out basic enemies quickly with my karate combos. A jump kick into a couple punches usually did the job, but sometimes a slide kick was required for breaking guards from below. This gradual increase in enemy difficulty complements the parkour to create some memorable and unique encounters throughout the game. But before discussing those, I need to first tear apart the gameplay and complain about all of its inconsistencies and issues. A big problem I felt with this combat system is that sometimes when getting shot by enemies, you just get stun locked and can't evade them, which is typically a guaranteed death. This issue feels worse if an enemy hits you with a melee attack, and even more frustrating if you're just getting ping-ponged by multiple enemies. This is even further exacerbated by the following assholes, because they have the goddamn tasers which completely halt all movement, and oh my god was it infuriating at times. It too often feels like you deal an inconsistent amount of damage to enemies. Sometimes a combo just won't stun an enemy or damage them enough to kill them, when other times it has. I've heard from friends that this is connected to Faith's momentum, but I honestly didn't notice this being true. I might just be dumb, though I'm still criticizing for the game not telling me this vital information if it's correct. When you fall off of a tall building, rather than killing you immediately to try again, you have to watch Faith fall the whole way down. This, combined with the extremely loud white noise that builds up as you approach the ground, is very annoying to hear every time you die. God forbid you fail the same jump several times. I know I did. Parkour just straight up doesn't work sometimes in many different instances, such as missing a wall when trying to run up or along it, jumping for a zipline and missing it for no reason, mantling over an object like a railing instead of standing on top of it, running up a wall instead of along it, missing a springboard off of an object for no reason, and missing a ledge grab after jumping from a wall run that has worked on different lives but not this one, I guess. In a game with parkour elements, this wouldn't be as much of a concern, but since the game is parkour, anything less than pristine is going to create issues for me. The B button guidance mechanic just doesn't work sometimes or is generally unhelpful. It too often points to the end point of your path rather than the immediate direction you need to go. It's the equivalent of asking Google how to get to South America and being told to travel south. Like, yes, technically that is how you get there, but come on, man. Sometimes Faith will effortlessly climb up objects, but other times she is extremely slow at it, as though she's hauling a ton of bricks behind her. It's like the roll of a dice if the game decides to run up a wall and immediately climb up it, or if Faith will grab the ledge and slowly pull herself over it. This issue and some others are made worse when you're in combat or being shot at and chased by enemies. Slowly running up a wall can entirely determine if you're going to be shot or hit by enemies chasing you, which will knock you off the damn wall. It also sucks that you can fail time trial challenges for this one simple error, since some of the levels have such strict time requirements. To end off the gameplay section with a generally more positive note, this paragraph will focus on highlighting a few of the memorable encounters I alluded to earlier in the script. The game utilizes the helicopter escape set piece a couple of times, though none of them beat the rush felt in the first mission. In general, the first mission is a fantastic introduction to the game, with the on-screen text displayed along the sides of buildings and through the streets below as you look out towards the sprawling city in front of you, begging to be explored. Venturing through the underground sewer channels, at least that's what I think they are, might have been very confusing to me, but it's the first time where you're dumped into a large open space and let loose to uncover the path ahead. At the end of the fourth mission, you encounter a character named Ropeburn, whom you have a short tussle with. You open a door to the roof of a building where he grabs and throws you across the space. You beat him by performing a disarm at the correct time, which was borderline impossible for me because I'm already bad at executing the disarm mechanic. And every time you die, you have to watch the short cutscene of being grabbed by Ropeburn, which was many times for me. Who decided this? It's so tedious. I'm not convinced that someone tested this and figured it was acceptable. One mission has you avoiding enemy gunfire while also running along train tracks and avoiding the oncoming locomotives, chugging at Mach Jesus.
I like trains.
This already cool part is concluded with a short sequence of dodging signs while riding on the top of a train, which I know I talked about before, but it stuck out of my mind enough to mention it again more formally. A really cool section. For a section that is extremely uncool would be this single room in the 6th mission, where you break into the headquarters of the largest security company in the city. This room is a culmination of all the minor annoyances that I listed out earlier, and it's the only part in the game that made me put down my controller and quit for the one night. This part is so goddamn frustrating, and there's no guidance whatsoever with where you're supposed to go. My first idea was to kill all of the enemies and then explore freely to figure it out, but every enemy is in the line of sight of another one, so it was literally impossible to take them all out safely. I spent over 30 minutes here and must have died at least that many times too. I genuinely hated it. I searched up a video for this section just to learn that you had to go to the left the whole time and could ignore the entire other 3/4 of the room. What the f***? The mall escape sequence in one of the later missions was initially very confusing, but later became one of the coolest parts in the game. You're being rushed by so many enemies and have to both evade oncoming gunfire but also navigate from the top floor that is several stories high to the bottom floor. There's several different shortcuts and methods you can take to get through this section, and it was really fun to discover the best path through all of the chaos. And there was a juggernaut with an LMG just chilling on the bottom floor. The start of a different mission later in the game tells you to sneak into the shipping facility in front of you and lets you loose to figure it out. It took me 10 minutes to realize that the game was basically lying to me, and instead of smartly maneuvering the environment to breach the building, what you actually had to do was to climb into the back of an idle truck with no one around. You've never had to do anything like this before in the game, and it's so out of left field. This was so stupid, and it reminded me that there's such a thing as underthinking, which the developers certainly did here. Riding in that truck leads to a stealth-ish section in the parking garage that will quickly explode into all-out pandemonium. The objective is once again to run from A to B with an absurd collection of enemies to evade, but weaving around and in between cars felt very empowering, leading me to really enjoy this part of the level. My last point is a few comments on the final mission of the game, the Spark. I actually think that this might be my favorite level in the game, with 3 really cool sections and an awesome aesthetic with climbing the tallest building in the city. The first of these parts is navigating through an elevator shaft, which was pretty neat. The second of these parts is sneaking through a section of connected roofs while avoiding 3 sniper enemies. The area is cleverly built to be able to avoid most of the gunfire as long as you move strategically. You can have all 3 snipers pointed at you if you're in the wrong spot, but that'll be entirely your fault if it happens. I'm unsure how they made this section so good while having other encounters suck so bad it feels like they weren't even play tested. The final section is the server room, with an unbelievable amount of enemies ready to shoot at you. However, this is one of the few encounters to have an additional objective requiring each of the server banks to be destroyed before progressing, which you can achieve by either baiting enemies into shooting the banks themselves or picking up a weapon and massacring them yourself. I ended with a hybrid of the two due to my no shooting enemies playthrough rule, but it's cool that the developers implemented a truly pacifist option for completing this section and not compromising the experience for some players. And that's basically all I have to say for the gameplay in Mirror's Edge. It's pretty obvious that this is the longest section of the video since this is what the main focus of the game is, and boy did I have quite a bit to say. I do want to mention that I tried the time trials mode and spent 30 minutes on the introductory trial to realize that I was not interested in doing more of these whatsoever. I could go into more detail about individual levels, but that sounds like a very dry conversation that I don't want to have. I'm ready to sleep. So let's wrap this video up then. Mirror's Edge is a fairly well executed game built upon a solid foundation. The passion, immersion, and level design are all here, but it's just not quite perfect. While I really did enjoy my time in this game, the frequent annoyances, both insignificant and large, continued to hinder my enjoyment. However, when you're really into it and the game works, it can be one of the smoothest platformers I've ever played. Visually, the game doesn't have much variety in its constant city bathed in daytime lights or starry skies, but the layouts and construction of these parkour playgrounds are nothing short of elaborately genius. If you haven't already played Mirror's Edge, then I can definitely recommend it, as long as you're willing to put up with the abundantly frequent inconsistencies that I encountered that plagued my overall enjoyment. Thank you for watching.